Hey friends, I'm sorry I'm late.
No worries.
All right, let me quickly pull up the agenda doc. Does everyone have a link to the agenda doc? I think we've got a fairly short agenda today. Melba, it looks like it is basically you here.
I call dibs.
Do we have, first of all, I should note, as a standard procedure, this call is being recorded. Your time to drop now, if you don't like that, is now. And then also, I'd like to invite anyone who's new on the call, who feels like introducing themselves. Now is your chance to do that. Do we have anyone new today?
I don't know if I've joined this call since this group was created. So hi, my name is Jonathan Leitschuh. I'm a software security or open source software security researcher and the first ever Dan Kaminsky Fellow.
Sweet. Good to meet you, Jonathan.
So I've been on a couple of calls, but didn't introduce myself. I'm Will Lank. I'm a professor at NC State. I do research broadly across system security and recently focusing on software supply chain.
Cool, thank you. Good to meet you too. Melba, I think you're the only one with agenda items today. Do you want to kick us off with the first one, and we can take it from there?
Yeah, and thanks, Isaac, and apologies for the raspy voice. I've been hit by the triple-demic, so bear with me. Bear with me. So yesterday during the Salsa positioning meeting, we were trying to figure out, how do we improve for 2023, right? How do we make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we're coordinating with the other teams. And so really, because Salsa is underneath the Supply Chain Integrity Working Group, Fresca is underneath, and now S2C2F, it would be good to have some level of priority / roadmap from the broader team of what we should be doing collectively together, because we're off on our own, doing our own thing. And I feel like we could be more effective if we start putting our heads together and collaborating more. And I know Jay has been a big proponent of that during several meetings. And the reason why we bring that up is because whenever we try to do any positioning blog, a lot of times we don't have insights into what some of the other groups are doing. And so then we're kind of stuck. And so this is a recurring theme, not only within Salsa, but then, for the peer teams of Salsa, as an example. So do we have a list of what we want to accomplish from a supply chain integrity perspective for 2023 collectively? If yes, does that mean that, we can potentially, I know this meeting's monthly, but maybe on the bi-week, maybe the leads get together and have a discussion, right? Because I think once a month is not enough for the leads. So just trying to get thoughts on this particular topic.
I agree with everything you said. I think that, my observation, and I'm relatively new to OpenSSF, my observation would be that I think that what we're missing is we're missing we have a missing middle problem, essentially, that we have an OpenSSF that has a broad, expansive vision at the top level around open source security. I think then we have individual working groups. We have Salsa, we have S2C2F, we have Fresca, we have various groups doing various things at ground level. What we're missing, I think, at the level of this working group, supply chain integrity, is what is the overall vision for supply chain integrity, and how and in what way are we substantively moving towards realizing that vision? And I think that's what you're describing, that the individual groups are progressing, like things are happening in Salsa land, things are happening in S2C2F land, but to what extent are they enabling something at a higher altitude, or to what extent are they contributing towards an overall supply chain integrity vision? That is something which we're lacking, I think, in the OpenSSF, a really crisp articulation of what is the vision for this working group, supply chain integrity overall. How do these pieces fit together and contribute towards that vision? Is that fair? Is that kind of is that a fair restatement of what you said, Melba?
Yes, correct. Right. And then, once we do have that vision, the coordination, right? Again, this meeting once a month with the leads is not enough, right? I'm sure there has to be at least another checkpoint in the month to say, okay, this is what we are having issues or whatnot. Could it be offline? Sure, but we all know we have day jobs and it's hard to coordinate schedules. So this used to be a biweekly. Maybe we do keep it as a biweekly, but the middle one is really meant for the leads to catch up versus the broader community. I don't know, but it was just a thought. So those two topics were really combined instead of separate to try to further the cause, right? Be more productive, have more tangible outcomes. Because I know I'm struggling with that from a positioning standpoint in salsa, and so I'm going to have the same conversation with the salsa group tomorrow, right? The left hand is not talking to the right hand, and it's very difficult to coordinate. So yeah.
Yep, no, that makes sense to me. And I think, I mean, I would my observation, having seen this meeting go from bi-weekly to monthly, I think that it's because we didn't have enough of a framework at this middle altitude here, that we didn't really have much direction for this group. It didn't seem like there was much to talk about. No one really kind of knew quite what we were doing here. And so the meetings became ineffective, lower in value. And so, we slipped it down to once every month because we weren't getting much value from it. I think if we had, a vision which we all agree with and we're all built in on and we're all working towards, I could imagine a bi-weekly cadence making sense because, hey, we're all in alignment. We all agree where we need to be in 12 months' time. We're all chewing through a list of items to get there, and we can make progress on that at a bi-weekly cadence. So I almost think that the fact that this is a monthly meeting it was almost an outcome of this, not having the necessary structure at this level to make the meeting useful. Jay, you are uncharacteristically quiet. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, you know what? I echo, and Isaac, you and I have had many conversations about this, and on the other hand, Melba and I have as well. I came in many months ago now. I came in to the OpenSSF, and then of course when we were originally pitching what was then the OSS-SSC framework, and of course we changed the name when it got adopted. The whole idea was collaboration, partnership, and then that 360-degree view around supply chain security. And I'll say the same thing once again. In terms of visioning for the working group itself, I think the working group's the vision. I mean, aside from mapping to the overall mission and vision of the OpenSSF, and of course where we fit in that, I think from a standpoint of the frameworks that we have and as SIGs underneath this working group, and then of course Fresca as a technical component to that, and then maybe even other technical components that can come in as a result. I think we're heading in the right direction. I think all we have to do is just put those things together on paper as sort of our general roadmap that'll map with our mission and our vision for the working group. And also, you and I have talked about this in terms of, and we really didn't know what that looks like. So I'm glad Melba articulated it. But even you and I talked about this. There should be something in the middle somewhere, and we don't know, But we have the SIG meetings, and we have the subcommittee meetings, but there's got to be something that happens in the middle there where we build that connective tissue between what effective SIG is doing, and then how that maps to the overall vision and mission of the working group, and then maybe even how that maps to other working groups, like the end users working group, the best practices working group. Because, and of course, attending some of the TAC meetings and attending some of the planning meetings and everything else, and the Diagram Society meetings, there is a big push to figure out, we have so much going on across the breadth of the OpenSSF. What we're losing traction of is how we all work together and collab together towards our outreach to, whether it be the US government, the EU, and how everything that we're doing affects policy, procedure, and guidance across the globe. So I think there's now a requirement for us to get a little tighter with some of the things that we're doing, so that we can meet those thoughts and those ideas a little bit easier collectively. Right? I said a lot just now. I
think that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think, I mean, at this level, like I think it would be difficult for us to, hey, establish the nature of how we work with all the other groups in the OpenSSF until we have something in place for how we think about supply chain integrity. It feels like we should start with, what is the vision for this group, supply chain integrity working group? And once we decided, okay, here's our scope, here's our charter, here's what we think matters, here are the outcomes which we're driving towards, we can, at that point, we can then go, okay, well, how does end users fit into that? How does tooling fit into that? How do we represent this work best in the diagram of society, and so on? And I mean, thinking about this supply chain integrity working group, actually, I'll pause. Melba, you have your hand up.
I was just curious if somebody knows of where the charter is for this group. I don't know where the repo is, if there even is one, or if there's a website.
So at the top of the meeting notes doc, there's a link to the charter. Okay,
thank you.
So I had just a sort of a quick thought here, and I'm not on many working groups, so feel free to ignore this. But from what I'm hearing is because there's a lot going on, because there are three different efforts going in here. One of the purposes that this working group could serve is really as a sync point going towards that larger vision. And you could have a little bit of structure in terms of the three sort of sub-projects coming in, reporting on notable accomplishments, problem areas, and calls for help, and kind of current priorities, and then putting that within the framework of sort of that larger vision of where we're going towards. And that would also help serve some of Melba's concerns that she brought up on the agenda.
I think that's fair, and I think, but I come back to, like, we should. It seems like the mechanism for achieving our vision, and like the meetings that support it, and the agendas for those meetings, and how we structure them, the types of issues we bring up, are all ultimately subservient to the vision itself. Like, without having that vision agreed, and we're aligned, and we're agreeing this is the direction we're headed, we can then talk about how many wheels we need on the car, and who's holding the steering wheel, and who's going to change gears, and so on. It seems, I'm going to throw something out there. It seems to me, looking at S2C2F, looking at SALSA, looking at what we have in common with supply chain integrity, it seems to me that a straw dog vision for the supply chain integrity working group could be, this working group is about scalable, standardized practices for supply chain security. And today we have SALSA, and SALSA has specified a set of scalable, standardized practices for build and provenance. And we have S2C2F that has standardized a scalable set of practices for dependency management, another important part of supply chain security. And so they fit together into this vision and contribute to scalable, standardized practices for supply chain security. And if I was put on the spot and if I was in charge of the world and someone said to me, what should the vision for supply chain integrity be? I would say we should come up with a single framework, a pragmatic supply chain security framework covering the key functional areas. And it's a single framework. And so it would take the best of SALSA for build and provenance. It would take the best of S2C2F for dependency management. Let's build something up for vulnerability management. Let's build up a set of best practices for source code management and how fuzzing is done. And then we have an overall framework covering the key functional areas or the key functional concerns of supply chain security. And there's a single framework, and people don't have to worry about whether it's called S2C2F or SALSA or Fresca or what acronym it has. There is a framework. The OpenSSF has a framework, a single one for scalable standardized practices for supply chain security. That would be my vision for this group, that we come up with a framework, and S2C2F concentrates on where its center of gravity is today around best practices for dependencies. We have SALSA concentrate where it is today on build and provenance. Let's stand up another group thinking about source management or vulnerability management or fuzzing or other key functional areas. But let's assemble these into a single unified framework to address this problem space as a whole. I'm going to pause there. Abdullah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just kind of like to make sure on the framework that you're mentioning, right? From the sounds of it, and that's a question I was going to have, is we want to make sure that that framework covers the enterprise level effectively, right? Not only the pipelines per se, right? You jumped into vulnerability management team and other areas that comprise an enterprise. So I guess, yeah, it would be good to make sure that we decide whether which areas we're going to cover, and I guess to what extent it's going to be at an enterprise level, right?
Yeah, and I think absolutely, and I think some of these practices. I mean, the interesting thing looking at these is that build and provenance, these practices, they can be encoded by a trusted builder, and we can say, I'll put my trust in the builder, and if the builder has built an artifact, it can tell me it's hermetic, it's isolated, it's to use these materials, it's assembled this artifact. And I kind of don't need to trust the organization who owns the source, as long as I can say, okay, I can draw a strong line between source and artifact here. I think S2C2F, the set of practices, my trust will be in the organization who attests to the fact that they're following these practices. But ultimately, there's, and I mentioned this in the S2C2F meeting yesterday, there's a double whammy here that adopting the practices, if we say organizations that adopt S2C2F practices or SALSA practices, they realize the security benefit by doing builds better or by managing dependencies better, and there's real security benefit from doing that. Now, if they produce attestations related to those practices which flow downstream in the supply chain, consuming organizations can then implement policy based on, I'm not going to deploy anything that's below SALSA level 3, or I'm not going to be interested in any artifacts which aren't conformant to S2C2F level 4, or whatever it may be. And then consuming organizations can realize a security benefit too. And so you get, on both sides of the equation here, you get better practices upstream, and you get better assurances and policy downstream. So it seems to me, and I guess my difficulty is, what do we need in terms of establishing a vision? Like I've thrown out a straw dog vision. I'm happy if people want to tear it apart or suggest any alternatives, or say why this isn't appropriate, or why 6 frameworks would be better than 1. It feels to me like having an OpenSSF framework which decomposes the problem space into key functional areas and then standardizes scalable practices in each area. If we deliver that, dang, that's kick-ass, it seems to me. And I think we've got some great raw materials in SALSA and S2C2F. Melba, Jay, anyone else on the call, any opinions on that? And what would be the next step if we think that, okay, this is within a standard deviation of the right vision? How do we iterate and get to the right one?
Yeah, you know what? I love that. I'll be absolutely 100% honest. I love that, not just for this working group, but I love that for the OpenSSF. You know, if we think about that in concept, and then the overall, you know, think about it in concept of the OpenSSF and what the OpenSSF represents currently, and then what it's aspiring to be across the globe, and being the de facto, hey, if you want to understand open source security, you come here to understand it. For us to develop a universal framework that can be accepted globally, and then have as the foundation of that framework, SALSA, S2C2F, the tooling with Fresca, and if we come up with any other things, those gaps, that's phenomenal. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
I dig it. And actually, you brought Fresca in really nicely, because Fresca, it feels to me like Fresca is almost a reference implementation. This is demonstrating how to make it real. This is demonstrating how it works in practice, and it's a valuable proof point that this is not just an academic exercise. Because hey, yes, we've got these frameworks, but we also have a real world illustration of how this works with tooling and automation around it. Melba, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely like the vision. It's just making it a reality, right? We need to get the leads together to make sure that we all agree, right? I know it's very light today, probably because people are on vacation, but I love the simplicity of the vision, and now it's just a matter of, okay, how do we go execute so that we're talking to one another, we're not stepping on each other, but we are marching towards the same, beat of the drum kind of thing.
I love it. So as a practical next step, why don't I just write up something quick, and I mean, I can share it in the Slack channel. Like you say, it's quiet right now. The next 2 weeks is going to be very, very dead indeed. And maybe if I throw a Google Doc into the channel, we can all pile into that, work on it. I'll make it open for editing. People can comment, refine, help tweak in between now and the next meeting in a month. And then in the next meeting a month, maybe we have a bigger attendance, and we could even kind of try and rally people to come and say, hey, we're going to kick off 2023 by reviewing this draft vision that we have. And, hey, we've had, Jay giving us a rough thumbs up, and Mel giving us the rough thumbs up. We've had the 7 people in this call today look at this and kind of, it's just me riffing on it, but nodding along with it so far. If we get it into a Google Doc, refine it in time for next meeting, maybe we can get a bigger attendance to actually kind of begin to rally around it. I would love to see that start kicking off 2023 with, yeah, we're all nodding along, we're all singing along with this thing, and it gets us. And then I think we move this meeting to a bi-weekly cadence, and we're tracking. Okay, we have a vision now. How do we have SALSA contributing towards that vision? Do we have S2C2F contributing towards that vision? What's the next functional area that we want to go conquer? How do we standardize that? I think the enterprise use case and enterprise relevancy of this is super interesting. That I think that, part of the value that OpenSSF brings for enterprise is really establishing. Today, it's establishing a common vocabulary, a common reasoning framework, a common conceptualization of the space. It feels almost to me like if we can produce and deliver against this vision for open source, every enterprise, every substantive software enterprise in the world is a consumer of open source. And so these practices, these frameworks, these attestations, this metadata will flow transitively into enterprise anyway, because enterprise consumes open source. And maybe that's the vector into enterprise adoption here, is that every enterprise on earth today, within a tenth of a standard deviation, is a consumer of open source. And so as we produce SALSA attestations, S2C2F attestations, other metadata, these will flow into enterprise, and enterprise will begin to build policy engines around them. And once they have policy engines around them, there will be an incentive to adopt these practices internally and fit into the same policy frameworks. I don't know. Again, I'm riffing here, but Melba, I appreciate you bringing this into the agenda, because this is something which has definitely been lurking, and I think it's hindering this group as a whole, that we do have this missing middle that you and Jay are pointing to, that we don't have a strong vision at this altitude to pull all this stuff together in service of what it is supply chain integrity means to OpenSSF. And if we can fill in that gap, we're going to have a much better 23.
Agreed.
So this was, forgive me if this is entirely obvious, but I think that the thing that I really honed in on, Isaac, your message is this scalable aspect, because if it's just standardized practices for supply chain, like that's just too generic and too vague, and the standardized aspect, I think, kind of really takes it to something that there's a goal, something that can be measured. You know, there's an automation aspect to that. It can relate and divide into different languages and environments. I really like that aspect.
Totally. And actually, I mean, we might as well, yes, and to that, we might as well say, okay, in terms of this vision, what do these words mean to us? When we say scalable, we mean, yes, a uniform approach across languages and ecosystems. Yes, we mean automatable and automation wherever possible. Perhaps we also mean like implementable at key points of leverage in the ecosystem. For instance, like, hey, package managers, before, they're a point of leverage for package distribution, and they're a very natural trust boundary, which is useful for thinking about what does salsa look like end to end. And so, yeah, we can start looking at what does scalable mean to us, and then define some principles for how we prioritize and make decisions based on how we approach this vision as a whole. But I think, yeah, you raise a key point, that it's not just about, hey, we'll throw some best practices into the world. It's like, how do we make these automatable, implementable at scale, uniform across languages and ecosystems? What are the key points of leverage for establishing the right trust routes, and how attestations flow throughout the supply chain?
I've tried to capture some of the stuff in the notes, but if I've missed anything, please add.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm super terrible at taking notes while I'm rambling. Maybe I should take more notes and ramble less. That's probably a lesson for me.
I do the same, so don't worry.
Thank you, Melba. So I think I'm happy to take the action of like kind of sketching a Google Doc. I mean, I can have something and put a doc in the channel that we can all look at and work on and ruminate over the holidays on in the next day or two, and we can maybe use that to start to drive initial consensus, and then once we have that kind of almost nucleation site of consensus, we can start to build outwards upon it, get consensus across the supply chain integrity working group, when we have in a broader set of attendees, and then from there we can then formalize by saying, hey, OpenSSF, we've reimagined our charter and vision. Here it is. Here's what we're pursuing as a working group. Here's how Salsa, S2C2F, Fresco, and everything fits into it. Here are the gaps we're going to fill into in 23. And here's how we see other key partnerships in OpenSSF, that we can help others in OpenSSF and also get help from in realizing our vision.
I think that's the way to go, Isaac. Otherwise, this will turn into a letter for Santa, effectively. But yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I'm excited. I had selfish reasons. I felt like the positioning working group, we had a lot of energy, we had a lot of ideas, and again, the left hand's not talking to the right hand, and it made us pivot too many times to the point where we could not deliver effectively. So I'm trying to avoid that mistake again in 2023.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I mean, the other thing that occurs to me, and Melba, Jay, you maybe have thoughts on this too, is that if we did have a a crisp articulation of what we think this group is about and what we collectively we want to get done and where we're headed at the supply chain integrity level, I think we could even start to look at what organizations and people and other things do we need to pull into this group to make it happen, right? I mean, we have representations from Microsoft, from Google, you know, from IBM. You know, are there other organizations that we would want to pull in and actively solicit contributions from? Like, it would be great to have, I don't know, someone from NPM come into this group and from a package, or someone from PyPI, or, you know, if we think the package managers are a key point of leverage for us for achieving this vision, we could decide, okay, let's go to NPM and say, hey, we've got this idea. Can you provide an NPM rep? Can we pull in a PyPI rep? Can we pull in a Rust Rates rep? Can, you know, what other key points of leverage are there in the ecosystem that we don't have access to, that we can actually go and establish access to from this working group? Again, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here, but it feels to me like once we have this kind of vision that we all agree on, we can even look at, you know, yes, we need to define our meetings and how we execute around it. We could also find that we have key collaboration gaps or key representation gaps in this meeting that we need to actively close.
So hi, this is Arno. I've been listening, and I want to interject on this. I completely agree with you. And I mean, earlier you were talking about, you know, revising our charter and basically telling OpenSSF, hey, this is what we want to do. I mean, practically speaking, this is going to the TAC with your charter and say, hey, we are revising your charter in such a way. Is everybody okay? We want everybody to be aware. And the next step, basically what you're touching on now, is what we traditionally call the call for participation, which can be both, you know, kind of a broad call for interested parties. And of course, it can also be pointed, targeted to specific organization, entities, whatever, people that you actually feel like you would benefit from and maybe is interested in what you intend to do.
I love that. I love that. Jay, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna add to that. You know, we go down the road that we're talking, right, and we let the what we're doing at a foundational level drive the umbrella, right? We come up with that framework. While we're coming up with that framework, while we're coming up with that road, with that framework, the framework will drive who we need to reach out to, right? So we can recognize those gaps and say, hey, we need to pull in somebody from this organization that's doing this outstanding work in this particular area. Let's reach out to them and bring them in.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Organizations may not necessarily know the breadth of what we're doing across the OpenSSF. It might even be an avenue for us not only to bring someone into what we're doing here in this working group, but maybe open them up to the OpenSSF period, and then they'll be able to bring other people into other working groups, right? It's across the board. So like I said, I think this is a fantastic, I think what we're talking about here is fantastic. We got it down in the notes. You know, you, I, Melba, Arnold, we're all over the place. So I mean, I can't wait for 2023 with this. This is going to be outstanding.
Awesome. Cool. I feel like, so I will have something in the Slack channel by the end of the week. And it may be a little bit rough around the edges, but it'll at least be like a doc articulating some of you know, what we've talked about here. Maybe I can, you know, I'll put some placeholders in that we can fill in the kind of, you know, operating principles and how we'll, you know, I mean, to William's point about, you know, how we operate and how we make things scalable. And then we can work on that ahead of the meeting in a month's time. And then the meeting in a month's time, I will actively ask people to come and attend because we want to, you know, do a 2023 kickoff around, you know, this draft vision that we have. Does that make sense? Does that round of thumbs up from anyone? Yay, thumbs up from Elba, thank you. and Trevor. Awesome. Okay, I think that we have a plan here, Melba. Thank you again for bringing this and putting this in the agenda and bringing the perspective and giving us all the kick that we needed, and also for taking notes behind my rambling. I really appreciate it. All right, with that, I'm going to call this to a close. Thank you again. I hope everyone has a great holiday season, whatever that looks like for you all. And I will see you all in January. And let's get us into a great position to have a kick-ass 23.
Thanks,
you, everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.